Hello. Thank you first and foremost to Enki and BMAT for inviting me to give a presentation on creating beautiful UI interfaces with Flutter. And then I'm really going to be going into the secrets of Flutter for achieving amazing UI effects. This all came about the last BMAT that I attended. There was a group of developers that asked if Flutter could produce a production quality UI, and how would you do it? And I hope those group of developers are watching now because this is how you do it. All right, so who am I? I'm an independent mobile app developer, and I began programming Swift in 2015, where I made a ridiculous number of dance apps for choreography teams to train. And what I learned was that choreography teams, they're on whole like to use Android. So all of my iOS experience was being undermined because a lot of people wanted to use Android. So they asked me to develop my app Dance Lab in Android. So after watching a Google Flutter versus Swift video by Stephen Mishuk, I was convinced then to switch over to Dart and Flutter. And then how I got into UI development is 2019, Google introduced a Flutter UI challenge with designing a Lenovo clock face. I didn't win it. However, it got me heaps interested into UI design using Flutter. And in 2020, I began teaching mobile app development to high schoolers. So this is more of an educational kind of presentation, and it will only take 20 minutes. It's going to be pretty quick. So I hope that we will get through the code just fine. Okay, so the purpose of the presentation is to demonstrate Flutter for UI, to offer tips for creating UI, and to identify the pros and cons along the way. This presentation will make you familiar of important Flutter widgets and concepts, and it give you insight to pixel perfect UI with Flutter. All right, now this is the UI that I am going to be replicating. The reason why is because this ties back to making Dance Lab my app for Android. I want to use this interface. So it was a cheeky kind of move to take this, prepare it for you guys, but I'm going to be using elements of it in my app for production quality. This is found on Dribbble, and the details are here. All right, so first and foremost, that particular UI uses a lot of Pneumorphism. So let's go ahead and discuss just for a moment what Pneumorphism is, just to get the underlying topics for those that are not aware. All right, so Pneumorphism is the art of representing how light source interacts with an object from a bird's eye view. Okay, decomposition of Pneumorphism with regards to Flutter is that we're going to have shapes, surfaces, shadows, and borders. And everything in Flutter visually anyway is a widget. So there are widgets for all of these things. And these are the widgets, these are the components that we're going to discuss. Now, Pneumorphism, if you look down, what you're seeing in this maze pixel image is Pneumorphism in its finest. You have a object that's supposed to be three-dimensional and has height, and it's interacting with a light source from the top left-hand corner. This light source is reflecting light off of it, and it's also causing a shadow effect where light does not go through. Now, first and foremost, there's the introduction to the container widget, which we have to consider for these. The container widget, as a thought whale, is the king of the ocean. It's the whale. Sharks and beautiful fish are widgets that you can use for UI, but the whale, which is the container widget, is the one that's going to be unaffected by the rest. It doesn't care what everything else is doing, and it is definitely the king of the sea when we're talking about UI. So when we're talking about UI and neomorphic effects, we're talking about the container widget. The Flutter container widget is comprised of just simply some parameters, some properties that you enter into it, and it's just the height and the width which you would expect it to be. So it's the size of the container. You enter a child widget, which is just a widget that you can nest inside. So for example, you can put in an icon, an image, or any other widget that you wish. And then the decoration is going to be dealing specifically, the decoration property is dealing specifically with the neomorphic effects that we're looking for replicating this specific UI. So it deals with surfaces, borders, and shadow effects. Container widgets are excellent for UI design. So the entire life purpose of the for the container widget is the apply layout and styles. And for our purposes, containers have a decoration property which controls the surfaces, shapes, and borders that we are very interested in manipulating. So now we're just going to be discussing the decoration property for the container widgets, which we're going to be using for the Neomorphic effects. So the decoration properties under the hood is just being passed to the container a box decoration. It controls the border radius. So it's going to be the shape control, which we're going to cover. It controls the gradients of the colors, which we're going to cover. It covers the box shadow for Neomorphic and other just plain effects. And then it also covers, it has a property for border control as well. And on the flip side, it gives us shape control for free. We'll discuss that. So now we're going to be discussing passing of these 4 properties to the box decoration widget. So first off, we're going to talk about shape control, which is the border radius widget. Now, here I have an example of a container, which is a height of 50 by 50. And then it also takes the property of a decoration, which is a box decoration. And I'm putting into this box decoration, this container, one of these 3 box decorations. And what you can see is that as we affect in the red coloring the border radius, if we affect the radius circular, the higher we make it, the more circular the widget becomes. So a general rule of thumb is if you take the height and width of a square and you divide that value, in our case it's 50 by 2, you're going to find that you're going to make a perfect circle of the widget that you are working with. All right, so now we're moving on to gradients. So this is going to take 2 types of gradient widgets. There's going to be a radial gradient widget, and then there's going to be a linear gradient widget. So for 3D surface effects, the gradient property of a box decoration is passed a radial gradient widget, which controls the Neomorphic effects. In our case, the radial gradient is passed colors. You have to have at least 2 colors. There's going to be a focal point, which is the location where the color, basically it's the location where the color is going to be the brightest. You have an optional property, which is the center. And you can think of the optional center property as where the color 1 will be rendered from. And then it's going to go to the focal point. And then the radius, you can think of that as a unit circle where the radius of the first color is going to be set to 1. So the radius is equal to 1 despite whatever the actual radius distance is. And if you want to put in like half a radius of it, you would enter in the value of 0.5. Now, this is just some examples so that you can see. In this case, we're just doing a 2-dimensional radial gradient. So we're not going to be dealing with center. All this is a focal, and it's going to have the red color begin at the center, and then it's going to radiate in a gradient format into the black color with a radius of 1. So the radius is going to encompass the entirety of the circle that we're dealing with here. Now let's go ahead and enter in the center just so that we can see what it looks like when we want to manipulate variables and properties of the radial gradient to see what happens. So we're going to have, this is what happens when you go from the center to the focal point, because remember, it's going to radiate from the center to the focal point, and it's going to go from the top center to the center. Now let's just go ahead and change the center properties around to see what happens. So if we go top right, center right, and then we're just going to go around. So that's all what the center property is going to have. And I've entered in the radius of 0.8 to take up approximately, let's say, 80% of the circle. Now, also important is the linear gradient. So in the linear gradient, this is just your stock standard linear gradient that most people are used to dealing with. It's going to have a beginning position, an end position, and then you're going to have a number of colors that you want to transition through with a gradient. You must have at least 2 colors, but you can take as many colors as you will give it. Okay, now on the box shadow, especially for the Neomorphic shadows, we're going to have a box shadow widget that we're going to use. Now let's go ahead and kind of understand what the Neomorphic shadow effects are. So to do this, let's go ahead and take a look at this. I've drawn a circle here that just is a circle that has the same exact the same exact color as the background. And it has a separator just so that we can see the circle that I've drawn. Now, in principle, what you're going to do is you're going to have two circles or two shadows that you're going to use. One that's a light color and it's pointed up and to the left. And then you're going to have a different shadow color, which is dark and pointed down to the right. If you superimpose these, you're getting the Neomorphic effect. And then to make it whole, what you can do is remove the border color. And then this is going to give you the Neomorphic effect that you're looking for. Now, shadow effects, the box shadow property of the box diagram widget is just a list of box shadows. So let's go ahead and take a look at what box shadows are. In this case, I've got two box shadows, one that I've omitted the code from, and one box shadow that takes the properties of color, offset, blur radius, and spread radius. So the color is going to be a single color. In this case, the shadows can only be one color. The offset is going to be the translation direction that you want it to take. The blur radius is going to be the distance in pixels that you're going to have away. So the larger a blur radius has, it's going to be softer on the shadow. And then the spread radius, you can think about that as the size that it's going to inflate to prior to the blur happening. Okay, now this is just a point for alignment coordination, the system that they use. So in this case, if you want to have the shadow that's going to be up and to the left, you're going to have a negative x-axis with a negative y-axis. And then if you want it down and to the right, you'll have a positive x-axis with a positive y-axis as well. And all right, so I've just included here some Flutter code for how to do shadows for a Neomorphic box. However, I've only done it for a box because I wanted to emphasize that the code here versus just giving you a Neomorphic effect. The container, which is going to have a height and a width, and it's going to have a decoration with a box decoration. But notice before I put the container, I put the property of the color in the container. However, now the color property is in the box decoration. When you're working with containers, if you contain a box decoration, you must put the color property inside of the box decoration or you'll have a compile time error. In addition to that, we're going to add the two shadow effects that we want to add. For this example, we're in the box shadow property, we're going to add two shadows that are both square. One's a white color and it's going to be up and to the left. And then another is going to be a blue-gray color and it's down to the right. So that's box shadows in a nutshell. So now let's go ahead and look at borders. I'm going to kind of fib here because we can't really do neomorphic borders, and I'll explain why in a second. So this is how you would achieve a neomorphic edge highlighted border with Flutter, or in theory anyway. So first off, what we have is a pill shape. But what I want you to realize is that this pill shape has four sides. It's just two of the sides have curvature, while the other two sides are straight as normal. Now, to do a neomorphic effect, we would change the color. We would do two things. We would first change the color of two of the sides. And in my case, I'm going to change the bottom color, and then I'm going to change the right side color with the curvature. And then the second component that you're going to want to add for neomorphic is that you're going to want to add a inner side color. This gives it a stunning visual effect, which is rather appealing, and it's quick and easy to do. However, there are limitations to borders in Flutter. You can change the color of each side. And in this code right here, I've simplified it just to show you that with the border, you can change the colors by doing a top, right, bottom, and left parameter when you enter it into the border. However, you cannot highlight rounded corners currently with Flutter, and this is something that they're going to be tackling in the near future. But as of now, you cannot do it. And this is just a little bit from Stack Overflow where I asked the question. I was like, hey, what's up? Why can't I do it? And basically they've given me, it's not ready yet in Flutter. So a border radius can only be given for uniform borders that are straight. However, there is a workaround. This is going to be beyond the scope because of the time restrictions that I have. But basically what we're going to do is enter into a custom paint. A custom paint tells the widget, tells Flutter how to paint lines that you want to use. So in this case, all I'm going to do is, and please, I encourage you to look at my code that I used for this. All I'm going to use is an edge painter, which tells Flutter that, hey, Flutter, I want you to draw in 2 curves and a line, and Flutter will do it for me. However, I can't enter it into the border. What I have to do is enter this into the child property of a container. But Flutter, I'm sure that they're working on this issue right now. Okay, so this is the duplication of the UI with Flutter that I wanted to work on. So I've done a little bit of cheating here. I've added this to Rotato just to give it a look like the UI a look as if it's in an iPhone, just to give it a little bit of stunning pizzazz. But we're going to look at it unedited here in a moment. Okay, so the UI elements necessary for this project are going to be the background gradient, which we'll cover in just a little bit. There's going to be the music app bar. There's going to be the images. There's just a song information. There's going to be a music scrub bar. And then there's going to be music floating action buttons. Now, I'm not going to go over all of this code because it would take quite a while. But we will go over just one of the buttons. But first off, and also I want you to see that there is also padding that we have to do in order to get the widgets separated from one another. All right, so the background gradient is using a linear gradient. Now, this is what a linear gradient looks like if I've changed the 2 colors. In here, I'm actually using, on the right-hand side, I'm using the linear gradient, which corresponds to the UI. But here, I just wanted to show you what the linear gradient looks like with 2 colors and 11 colors. On the left-hand side, there are 2 colors. It's going to be gray on the top and red on the bottom. And there's going to be a linear gradient transition in between. When you add in 11 colors, however, you do get a nice transition. However, you're going to see that there's going to be highlights of a specific color, and then it radiates into a small gradient from top to bottom from a small fraction of it. In this case, it's 1/11 the size of the screen. So the music player components that we're going to be working with here. So the sum of the parts of the components is nothing fancy. All of the parts, all of the working parts that I had, the fast forward button, the image, they're all just one widget, or one widget that I've made, one custom widget that I've made that contains 2 shadows, a border, a radial gradient, and then it's going to be that circle with an X. Now that circle with an X can be either an icon, an image, or a linear gradient to achieve the effect that I want to get. Okay, so all I've done here is changed the color, and I've changed the icon. And I instead of using between here, I'm using an image, and here I'm using just an icon. Same effects, everything's still the same. It's just changing the colors and the size parameters. Same for this rewind button. All I've done is added different colors, and I've given it a different icon. So all of these components right here are all from the same custom widget. It's just that I've manipulated the variables to go ahead and give me the effects that I want. Everything except for the scrub bar, which I'm not going to have time to cover today. However, please go ahead and take a look at my code. Now, I've tried to make this nice and neat. So what we have here is just a component builder on the top left-hand side. So this is the history button. So that's the back button if you wanted to go to a previous song. And that just extends a component builder. And in that in it is just a child widget that I pass so that I can nest inside of it some kind of icon. And then I'm going to pass the decorations that we were speaking about at the beginning of the seminar. So in this case, we have a shape effect which is going to have a history button attributes. And all the history button attributes do is to handle the size, the border width, and the border color. There's going to be a history button with surface effects. So that's that radial gradient that we were talking about. And all we have done here is passed it 2 colors. We've given it a focal point, we've given it a radius, and we've also given it a center. And then also we're going to enter in the shadow effects that we were talking about earlier. So we have a box shadow properties, and all we've done is passed it 2 shadow widgets. The shadow widgets only contain the color. They're going to contain the translated by, so I've given it a different name for the offset. There's going to be the blur size, and then there's going to be the spread size. Now, all up, this happens really quickly. I programmed this entire UI in about 30 minutes. It was the cleanup for it that took much longer. Okay, now then, let's do a comparison. So on the left-hand side of the left-hand UI is the UI that I got from Dribbble. The right-hand side UI is the one that I did with Flutter. And I'll let you guys be the judge to judge for yourselves how well I did. This is just a working model. It's not production quality yet. I would have to spend a bit more time on doing it, but I think it lines up pretty well. All right, so thank you very much for your attention. I'm very honored to be able to come and talk here. Are there any questions?
We do have some questions, George, so thanks very much for that. That's really interesting. Flutter's quite new, so I'm sure that would have been new to a lot of people, but certainly picking up some momentum. A couple of the questions, speaking of momentum, in terms of interest and uptake by high school students, how do you find Flutter compares to, say, native iOS or Android?
Yeah, so Flutter itself, I'm finding it to be much easier for high school students to pick up. And they're even more interested in being able to use it on all of their devices, because what I'm finding is high school students don't just have an iPhone, and they have Android and iPhone components on them. So they're very interested in being able to program once and then be able to use it on any device that they want.
Yeah, great. In terms of that, Flutter is a Google product, and it has a strong focus on material design. Are there any limitations when building for iOS with Flutter?
When we're talking about UI components with iOS, it used to be reported that was a bit of jank with Flutter. However, with Flutter 2.0, it's fixed a lot of the jank that was reported. As for visual stunning effects, it's really, really great. And there's always packages being developed which are going to allow you to use all of the components of iOS that you want to use. For example, you can use the cameras now, you can use the speakers, you can use basically any component that you wish through packages.
Yeah, great. And I think Flutter 2.0 also came with web support as well.
Yeah, that's correct. So it is definitely, it's not just web support, it's also desktop and Ubuntu as well. So it is it's becoming big. It is going to be huge. It reminds me of when Swift first came out. It's going through 2.0, which is almost identical to when Swift 2 came out. So I expect some really great things from it.
You spoke about cleanup a little bit, or refactoring, I'm guessing is what we're talking about. The ease at which you can wrap widgets and nest widgets and things like that in Flutter, does it have perhaps potential to turn into spaghetti code a little too easily?
I really don't think so. So I whipped this up pretty quick, so I didn't have the time to do a lot of the refactoring for the clean code that we would expect. However, if you're always keeping your different design patterns in mind, you aren't going to have a problem. The nesting of the widgets can be handled just by refactoring, just like you would in any other programming language.
Mhm. Yeah, great. Have you used any of the visual designers that output to Flutter, like XD or something else?
Yeah, I have used
How have you found
XD.
them?
So I used XD in course in collaboration with another package that I'm sorry, another app that I have, and it transitioned it extremely well. It's just I'm more of I like to do my own programming, so so when I do UIs, I like to have complete control versus relinquishing control over to some other third party thing.
So you design in Flutter directly?
I design in Flutter directly,
Yeah, great.
and
Okay. I suppose the hot reload helps with that.
yes, absolutely. It's very, very quick. Like I said, I did that whole entire thing in about half an hour's time.
Great. Last question. Have you run into any issues calling third-party code? Apparently there were some early issues that prevented Realm releasing their libraries for Flutter.
So with I personally have not, but I have heard about it. However, with Flutter 2.0, I believe that they are fixing a lot of these issues. But me personally,
Okay, great.
I
We've just
haven't.
had one more question.
Sure.
Sure. This is from Stack Overflow, so I'm just going to read it directly from the question. It says, I'm creating a Flutter application. If I run this application on debug mode, WebView works well, but if I run the application on release mode, it shows a blank screen. It's showing a platform exception. Have you ever run into anything like that?
The only time that I have run into something like that is when I didn't accurately use, like, for example, with Flutter, we could use like a material app widget followed by a scaffold. In that case, if I'm missing the correct nesting of the widgets, I could have experienced problems like that before.